Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to explore something that literally affects every single one of us, usually without us even realizing it's happening. We're looking at how our seemingly mundane, everyday choices actually reveal these profound truths about our deepest psychological needs. You know, it's funny. The smallest preferences, those quiet little things we do day in and day out, they almost always hold the biggest clues to how our minds actually work. Okay, so let's just dive right into this by holding up a mirror for a second. Have you ever, say, bought a whole stack of new books, carefully lined them up on your shelf, and then immediately went right back to scrolling on your phone? Or maybe you're the kind of person who watches almost every single Instagram story in your feed, like you know exactly what everyone else is up to, but your own profile hasn't been updated in months. Well, why do we do these highly specific yet honestly incredibly relatable things? To figure that out, here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll be decoding our everyday choices. Second, unplugging from the digital world. Third, finding comfort in escapism. Fourth, the trap of familiar misery. And finally, redefining success and joy. All right, let's jump straight into section 1, decoding our everyday choices, the hidden patterns of the human mind. And this right here brilliantly illustrates our first big reframe. A towering stack of unread books, it is absolutely not a failure. And no, it isn't hoarding either. It's actually fulfilling a deep psychological need. In fact, there's a Japanese word for this exact behavior. It's called Tsundoku. It's the act of acquiring reading materials and just letting them pile up, usually until your nightstand is literally threatening to collapse, all to build a physical environment that reflects your inner values and curiosities. It's basically building a library of possibilities. Now, what's really fascinating here is how our brain gets this premature hit of dopamine just by bringing the book home. Think about it. You aren't just buying bound paper. You are purchasing the idealized version of yourself. The version of you who is deep enough to read philosophy or organized enough to finally master productivity. The brain actually mistakes the physical act of buying for the act of doing, which gives you instant gratification. Plus, the anticipation of an unopened book is kind of perfect, right? It hasn't bored you yet, it hasn't challenged you yet, so the potential of the book is often way more rewarding than the reality of actually sitting down to read it. Now let's contrast that super quiet, private habit of book buying with a much louder one. Why some people emphatically celebrate their birthdays every single year. For these folks, it really isn't about the cake or the presents. It's about marking a personal milestone of growth and, well, survival. They're intentionally hitting pause on their daily routines to prioritize human connection. It fulfills this incredibly deep psychological need we all have to feel appreciated. Many actually use the day as a fresh start, kind of treating their birthday like a personal New Year's Day to totally reset their goals. Moving on to section 2, unplugging from the digital world. Why some people completely avoid the spotlight. So the crucial point here really comes down to this dichotomy, the online broadcaster versus the offline observer. People who just quietly watch Instagram stories without ever posting themselves, they don't necessarily insecure, and they definitely aren't antisocial. Actually, they just find observation more rewarding than visibility. They don't need that external validation of likes and comments to enjoy an experience. And on top of that, staying behind the screen just feels emotionally safer. It requires very little emotional risk compared to opening the floodgates to public judgment, right? And this directly brings us to why some people completely abandon platforms like Facebook or Instagram. It is a highly, highly intentional strategy. Think about it. Social media is this relentless stream of information that constantly drains your mental energy. So by stepping away, these individuals are actively protecting their attention and their peace of mind from constant overstimulation and that endless cycle of social comparison. They'd much rather keep their meaningful relationships private because they know that a beautiful sunset or a big personal win doesn't actually need an audience to be valuable. They've totally decoupled their self-worth from online metrics. All right, section 3, finding comfort in escapism, how our brains cope with reality. Consider this pretty surprising reframe. Summer is universally portrayed as the absolute happiest season, right? Vacations, beaches, endless sunshine. So why do some people actively dread it, literally counting down the days until autumn? Well, hating summer is actually a deeply logical, biological, and psychological response. First off, heat significantly increases mental fatigue. Your body has to work so much harder just to stay cool, and that completely saps your focus and energy. Then add in the high sensitivity to sensory overstimulation. We're talking loud crowds, blasting AC units, blindingly bright lights. And then there's the immense psychological pressure to artificially perform happiness. If your actual reality doesn't match that picture-perfect Instagram summer ideal, you can end up feeling super disconnected or even guilty. Finally, if you happen to associate past summers with stressful or lonely memories, the season itself literally becomes a psychological trigger. This deep need for escape also perfectly explains another wildly fascinating habit: why our highly active inner worlds invent these complex, fake scenarios right before we fall asleep. When the external distractions of the day finally quiet down, the brain just creates its own emotional stimulation. It uses these temporary fantasies to process unmet desires, things like success or love or closure that reality just isn't providing right now. It's a safe escape from daily stress. But actually, it's not all pure fantasy. A lot of the time, your brain is literally mentally rehearsing possible future conversations or challenges just to help you prepare for uncertainty. Let's look at Section 4, the trap of familiar misery, why we stay stuck in life. I want you to really let this concept sink in. The brain values familiarity more than happiness. Seriously, our minds will routinely choose predictable misery over the frightening, risky unknown of positive change. Why? Because to the brain, predictable equals safe. And this completely explains the psychology behind feeling like you're wasting years of your life, or that whole concept of the man-child. Someone who looks like an adult but dodges all real responsibility. It stems from the exact same invisible pattern: avoiding the discomfort of growth. People so often mistake self-awareness for actual self-improvement, like they know all their flaws perfectly, which creates this comfortable illusion of progress. But insight alone doesn't change behavior. They want all the freedom of adulthood without any of the consequences. And because their future self feels like a totally different, distant person, they sacrifice tomorrow's stability for today's immediate comfort. They stay trapped, essentially, just to protect a familiar identity. Now, if you have ever felt completely drained, and I don't just mean physically tired, I mean deeply tired of existing, it is absolutely vital to understand that this is not a weakness. It's a glaring sign of emotional exhaustion from being stuck in survival mode. The human mind simply was not designed to carry chronic stress indefinitely. When you're trapped in stagnant, unchanging routines, spending all your time just surviving instead of actually living, you lose your connection to personal meaning. When every single day feels identical to the last, the brain experiences a profound sense of stagnation, and that creates incredibly deep emotional fatigue. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, redefining success and joy, escaping the rat race. Let's talk about hedonic adaptation. This is the exact psychological reason why getting that big promotion, buying a bigger house, or upgrading your car literally never cures our deep-seated burnout. The brain is hardwired to quickly adapt to new achievements. So yesterday's massive thrill just becomes today's new normal, ensuring that more never, ever actually feels like enough.
Because of that, escaping the rat race rarely looks like some dramatic movie scene where you flip a desk and quit your job. It's usually a much quieter, internal shift. People who actually pull this off tend to walk through these specific steps. First, they realize endless upgrades are a trap and never create lasting satisfaction. Second, after years of pressure, their brain finally stops asking, "How can I get ahead?" and starts asking, "How can I prioritize stress relief and just feel calm?" Third, they stop postponing joy for some imaginary future date where they finally have permission to live. And step 4, most importantly, they stop letting the fear of falling behind make their decisions for them. That is how they reclaim their mental freedom.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer today, and I want to leave you with this final provocative question. I want you to really think about your own invisible patterns, the stacks of unread books, the way you use or totally avoid social media, those wild stories you tell yourself right before you fall asleep. What do your smallest, quietest habits reveal about your deepest psychological needs today? Because I promise you, once you understand the hidden shifts going on in your own mind, you'll start seeing yourself and the whole world in a completely different way. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey through the mind, and I will catch you next time.